Episode 5. Bibi wants her best friend back. What's wrong with Tina? Tina lay in the grass, her eyes opening slowly. She smiled when she heard the sound of galloping horses, feeling the earth vibrate beneath her. Her friends jumped out of the saddle and came running. Chico was the first to reach Tina and bent over her, worried. "Tina, is everything okay? Did you fall off your horse?" All of a sudden, Tina felt a burst of energy. She smiled at Chico with delight. "My hero!" she exclaimed. At that moment, Alex pushed into Tina's field of vision, followed by Bibi. I'm here, he shouted. But Tina rejected him abruptly. "Not you." Bibi and Alex exchanged a surprised look, and Bibi asked her, worried, "Is everything okay with your head?" Tina nodded at Bibi, then stroked Chico's cheek, which he clearly found uncomfortable and awkward. Chico quickly pointed to Alex. Tina, this is your boyfriend, Alex von Falkenstein." Tina giggled. But I would know that." Alex turned pale and asked her, "Don't you remember who I am?" Tina nodded. "Sure, Alex von Falkenstein." Alex breathed a sigh of relief, just as Tina added, "Yes, we are friends." Alex contradicted nervously. "No, we're together, and we've been together for quite a while now." "What is he talking about?" Tina asked Chico, who appeared more and more helpless. What was going on with Tina? Bibi turned to Alex. "Do you think it's from the fall?" He shrugged and asked, "Do you remember who that is, Tina?" trying to help her. Bibi Blocksberg?" Tina smiled. "Of course I know that. You're the summer guest." Bibi looked at her dismayed. Could she not remember their friendship? "Okay, there's only one thing to do." She raised her hands and said, "Eeny, meeny, shining star, tell us, Tina, who we are. Whiz, whiz." Bibi, Alex, and Chico looked at Tina expectantly. Tina blinked in surprise and then sighed happily. "Chico." She straightened up and threw her arms around Chico, sending them both tumbling backwards into the meadow. This couldn't be true. "I think she needs a doctor," Bibi decided resolutely. Knees, nose, ears. They raced to see Dr. Robert Squirrel, who was by the paddock at Martin's farm, outfitting the horses with capes on which he had painted in unmistakable zebra patterns. "Robert, we have a problem." Bibi came straight to the point. Tina ambled alongside her, hooked arm in arm with Chico, while Alex trotted sadly behind. "What's wrong?" asked Robert, interrupting his work. "Tina fell off her horse," answered Bibi, and immediately appeased him. No, nothing has happened." "Then what is it?" Robert went on. Bibi hesitated. "It's just, how should she put it?" She waved her hand in front of her face to suggest, "Tina is a bit confused, not to say out of whack." At that moment, Tina shouted, "Look, zebras! It's probably climate change." She tugged at Chico with a chuckle, which Alex, of course, didn't like at all. Dr. Squirrel looked at Bibi. Now he understood what she meant. She shouted loudly in Tina's direction. "That's a bite protection blanket. Protection against horseflies, that is, which had become a real nuisance to everyone and everything that sweat in this heat." Chico asked skeptically, "Disculpa, you're a veterinarian, right?" trying to slip away from Tina, who had nestled lovingly closer into him. "Have you ever heard of a doctor shortage out here in the country?" Alex replied sullenly. Could Tina finally stop worshipping Chico like that? "I also studied human medicine for 2 semesters, Dr. Squirrel said to Chico. Then he held out his hand to Tina with 4 fingers stretched out. "How many fingers are there?" Tina shrugged. "4? Stupid question." Dr. Squirrel nodded. "Yes, that's right. And can you still do knee, nose, ears?" He shared a friendly look with Bibi, who immediately joined in. "Knee, nose, ears," repeated Bibi. They each patted their knees, then crossed their arms and grabbed their noses and ears, alternating several times, hoping to check whether Tina's coordination was still working. "It's quite simple," Dr. Squirrel said gently, persuading Tina to do the same. Alex and Chico also tried it now, reciting the exercise with ease, in contrast to Tina, who, joining in just to flirt with Chico, succeeded only with noticeable difficulty. Keep practicing, Dr. Squirrel cheered Tina and Chico on, although he could already see that something was wrong. It's quite clear. He now spoke directly to Bibi and Alex. This is a short-term amnesia, triggered by the fall. I know it from horses. Their emotions are blocked, he told them. Then it's a kind of illness? Bibi realized. That's why my spell didn't work. What do we do now? Alex pleaded. It can't stay like this forever. No, Robert reassured him. It'll take 1, 2, 3, 4. If it doesn't get better tomorrow, you'll have to go to the hospital in any case. And try as much as you can to remind her of old memories, the vet recommended. Then she'll soon be back to herself again. Bibi looked determined. She would certainly do that. Dr. Squirrel returned to his work. The zebra stripes on the bite cape were dry. Well, I'm done. I need the next horse. I'll get it. Chico sprinted to the horses gathered at the back of the paddock. Chico! Tina started to follow him, but Bibi quickly raised her hand up to stop her. Tina didn't understand the gesture in her confused state, but she figured she could guess the number of fingers again. 5? This made Bibi laugh. Yes, right, wow. Then she grabbed Tina's hand. Come with me. The silk scarf. At the castle, Ethelbert took a package to Count Falco in the library. This just arrived. Count Falco was surprised. For me? He scanned the return address. Interesting. From Mrs. Win-Win. So, let's see. He tore it open like a kid at Christmas, and a yellow silk scarf appeared within. Count Falco liked it and put it around his neck. I must say, Mrs. Win-Win has very good taste. He looked up at his butler. What do you say, Ethelbert? Ethelbert nodded politely, but he found it rather odd that Mrs. Kim Win-Win would give such a costly gift. Underneath the fine packing paper was also a card. Count Falco finished reading it and then turned to his butler. Ethelbert, please call Mrs. Martin. Tell her that I urgently need to speak to her. Very well, Ethelbert replied formally. What might Mrs. Kim Win-Win have written? Memory is everything. Meanwhile, Bibi and Alex tried to refresh Tina's memory by taking a ride to the old oak. Tina joined reluctantly, as she would have much rather done something with Chico. Bibi pointed to the crown of the mighty oak and asked, Well, and? That's a tree, Tina replied brashly. Were Alex and Bibi trying to make her look stupid? But what kind of tree is that? Came Alex's voice from above as he perched between the dense branches. Tina's answer, an oak, didn't satisfy him at all. Tina, this is our old oak. He pointed to the heart with T and A carved into the trunk. Look, we carved it. Tina and Alex. T and A forever. It must ring a bell for you, right? Obviously not, the way Tina stared at him. When we race on the horses, then this is always where we finish, Bibi tried again. Or where we start, chimed Alex. Tina grinned contemptuously. Well, what is that then? Start or finish? There's a difference, Alex looked at Bibi desperately. This was useless. He shook his head and climbed down again. But Bibi wouldn't give up, so she began singing. We're Bibi and Tina, Amadeus and Sabrina. Tina shrugged. I don't know you. Alex stood beside them again and released a desperate sigh. But Bibi had another idea. Close your eyes, she asked Tina. Why? Tina murmured suspiciously. Just listen to the noises. The wind. Please, Bibi insisted. Tina obviously thought it was absurd, but finally closed her eyes. Bibi motioned silently for Alex to give Tina a kiss. He approached carefully, gently took her hands, and kissed her lovingly. Whereupon Tina immediately opened her eyes and clap, dealt him an angry slap across the face. Are you insane? She now raged at Bibi. I've had enough of this nonsense. I'm not crazy and I don't have to remember anything. I'm going back to Chico. She ran away, flustered. That's just the shock. Emotional blocking, Bibi tried to comfort Alex. Or she really fancies him, Alex sighed. No, Bibi contradicted vehemently. But Alex gave up. I just don't have that much time for her right now, or no idea, maybe she wants something new? You know her, she can get really worked up about things, Bibi reassured him. Alex nodded. Exactly, and if she gets carried away long enough, then maybe the feelings will be real someday. Even Bibi couldn't argue that, and she remained silent. SOS. Ethelbert had invited Suzanne Martin to the castle, and she immediately set off on her horse, because whenever Count Falco wanted to talk urgently, it had something to do with Martin's farm. Count Falco was caught somewhat by surprise when she entered the library. He had not expected her so fast. You wanted to see me, didn't you? Suzanne asked. Falco cleared his throat. Yes, there's news. Mrs. Kim Win-Win has raised her offer to me. Mrs. Martin sighed with little enthusiasm. I see. Count Falco apparently interpreted this as approval. Then we'll do it. You dissolve the lease and I'll sell. And you don't care what I say? Mrs. Martin asked. Count Falco replied. Suzanne, this is a win-win situation for all of us, both of us. But Mrs. Martin shook her head. There can't be so many winners at the same time. One always gets the short end of the stick, she considered. This really put Count Falco on the spot, but he didn't want to be swayed by this and replied, Suzanne, I will always meet you halfway. If you need anything, I am here. Remember the well? Mrs. Martin hesitated. It was true. He had already helped her a few times when things got financially tight for her. Even if she was of the opinion that the well construction and the sale of land was not a fair comparison. But her arguments seemed to have no effect on the Count. Yes, well then, we'll sell. I don't care anymore either. Only worries, no food, none of it makes sense anyway. She looked at the Count, tears welling in her eyes. Confounded, Falco stared at Suzanne. The last thing he had intended was to make a woman cry. Overwhelmed, he stuttered, Suzanne, you must not. I want you to. Would you please just give me a hug? Suzanne said. He complied clumsily with her request, putting his arms around her silently. For a moment, they both reflected on what they had experienced together. When Suzanne finally broke free from Falco's arms, she whispered, Thank you. Sometimes everything just gets a bit too much for me. Count Falco was very relieved that she was no longer crying. Suzanne's eyes then fell on the magnificent ceiling lamp with its countless glittering crystals. New chandelier? Yes, Count Falco nodded in amazement. What are you getting at? He faltered. Did she perhaps think he had already received money from Mrs. Kim Win-Win? But to avoid any further discussion, he quickly resounded. Well then, we won't do it. Suzanne Martin was dumbfounded. What do you mean? Count Falco declared frantically, Everything stays as it is. Thanks, Suzanne. See you soon. Without contradiction, Suzanne turned around and left the room with a smile on her lips. No matter how bizarre Count Falco sometimes behaved, she could keep the paddock, and that was the most important thing. Olé. Alex was still preoccupied with Tina's feelings. With brow furrowed, brooding, he sat with Bibi next to the old oak tree and asked her, Do you think Chico is taking advantage of this? Maybe he likes Tina, too. This suggestion stung Bibi a little, because she secretly liked Chico more than she wanted to admit. Alex looked at her questioningly. What is he actually doing here? I thought he wanted to travel around, so why isn't he traveling around? He likes it here, replied Bibi. But now that he mentioned it, she also found it strange that he was still at Martin's farm. Good for him, Alex replied defiantly. But Tina is my girlfriend. Come on, Bibi tried to cheer him up. Don't throw in the towel yet. She reached out her hand and helped him up before they set off for Martin's farm. They had no idea what was actually going on there. Chico had also wondered what was going on with Tina. Though he appeared fully engaged in the riding arena, managing 2 trotting horses during a movement training, his thoughts were far away. This whole thing was terribly unpleasant for him. And because he processed his feelings mostly through music, an idea for a new song came into his head. Chico, so deeply engrossed in his mental flow of lyrics, was oblivious to the person approaching right behind him. Face aglow with a radiant smile, Tina, wearing a pink flamenco dress with white dots, danced skillfully towards Chico, threw her arms up in a dramatic gesture, and twirled her skirt to the rhythm of the music before finally stopping in front of him. She extended her hand with the intention of his kiss upon it and whooped a celebratory "Olé!" Perplexed, Chico replied, "Olé?" Tina smiled in love. "Well, homesick?" Chico forced a smile. "Tina, this is very nice, and I like you, but more like a kiss me," cried Tina, throwing herself into his arms. Bibi and Alex reached the farm right at that very moment. "What the hell? I thought we were friends!" Alex stormed furiously into the arena. Chico quickly pushed Tina away from him. "I was just about to tell Tina that. I would never get involved with my brother's girlfriend," he shouted. Then nervously corrected himself. "Brother in spirit, never." Tina shouted at Bibi and Alex angrily. "Geez, don't you guys have anything better to do?" Bibi retorted sharply, "Yes, we do," and set forth with a spontaneous idea. She couldn't care less that moment about the farm rule of no witchcraft. Bibi raised her arms and yelled, "Eeny meeny thoughts unheard, Spanish Chico's a mega nerd, whiz whiz." The training reins dropped from Chico's hands as he now stood awkwardly in front of them in a buttoned-up plaid shirt, a tightly fitting vest 2 sizes too small, hair slicked back with wax, parted right down the middle, and bifocal granny-rimmed glasses. Even Alex couldn't quite keep it together when Chico, in a voice an octave higher than his own, as though a clothespin had been jammed over his nose, announced with the utmost sincerity,
"The theory of relativity deals mainly with gravity. Namely, I am of the opinion that far too little attention is paid for the factor of nanoseconds."
But Tina again snuggled up to him lovingly. "As long as we spend time together." This couldn't be true. Determined, Bibi raised her hands again. "Eeny meeny tattered cloth, Chico's nerd has gone to goth, whiz whiz." This time, Chico stood before them dressed in full black. With a grim expression on his face, he turned to Tina and grumbled, "The sun makes you feel good. I hate the sun." Tina simply replied with a cool smile, "Then let's go somewhere really, really dark." Bibi groaned, "Ugh, I'm going crazy here." Goth Chico nodded as if to agree with her. "No love without pain." Exhausted, Bibi used all her strength to raise her arms a 3rd time. But this time, she thought of something that Tina really didn't like and chanted, "Eeny meeny, full exposure, flash the show-off Chico poser, whiz whiz." At once, Chico morphed into a fake-tanned macho man in a leopard print bathrobe, sporting a greasy mustache, imitation aviator sunglasses, and a fat gold chain. He said pompously to Tina, "Who's the baddest daddy in the world, eh? Come on, kiss the ground I walk on. Go on, kiss it." Tina was immediately annoyed, but only by Bibi's magic. "Can you finally stop all this nonsense?" "Ugh, Tina, I just want you to see that you and Alex are a match made to be," Bibi justified herself. "Why?" snapped Tina angrily. "Just because you like Chico?" No," Bibi stuttered in surprise. Tina looked at Bibi knowingly and marched over until she stood face to face with her old friend. "Well, I think you do. You're jealous. Just admit it. You're in love with Chico." Bibi contradicted her loudly. "I'm not!" She was also quite embarrassed about Chico. Not only because he was still in the miserable, phony version of himself, but he had also smirked and said, "Ha! They always say that at the beginning." "I'm not in love," Bibi affirmed exasperatedly. Tina glared at her and mocked derisively. "The great Bibi Blocksberg never admits to anything, but loves telling others what to do." Macho Chico grinned. "That's how it's done, baby." "You stay out of this," Alex shot back at him angrily. "What do you want, frog boy, huh? Let's see you grow some hair on your chest first." Chico pointed defiantly to the neckline of his shirt with thick chest hair sticking out. "Want to touch it?" Alex went at him furiously. "That's it. That's my girlfriend, and I won't let anyone take her away from me. Especially not you." He hit Chico so hard that he dropped. Tina cried out in horror. "Alex!" But Alex threw himself onto Chico in a rage and decked him again across the jaw. Luckily, at that moment, the spell dissolved and Chico was back to his old self. Alex finally let go of him. Chico came to his feet and gasped. "Man, what the hell is this? What am I supposed to do, damn it?" Tina screamed at Alex. "Are you stupid? What's wrong with you? You can't hit Chico. Work on your aggression." She stomped back to the house. Bibi offered Alex a sympathetic look. Roger, who was taking a break with the pony, Billy the Kid, hadn't even noticed any of the commotion. A delivery man walked in through the yard and stopped in front of him. "Are you Roger Martin?" "Package for you. Sign here." The messenger handed over the parcel. "For me? Thanks." Roger opened the box and found the same scarf that Count Falco had received. Roger smiled. "Beautiful," he murmured to himself. But even more beautiful was that it had come from Kim Win-Win. Roger's heart fluttered as he turned to his pony. "What do you think, Billy?" Come back. Despite the incident at the riding arena, Tina was still wallowing in the joy of love. She wanted to make a tortilla de patatas for her beloved Chico. Determined to charm him, she opened the fridge, grabbed the eggs, and laid them out next to the tablet on which she'd found a recipe for this famous Spanish dish. Spanish tortilla. See, unfortunately, the translation into English wasn't so good. Beat the proteins with salt until stiff. Cream the egg yolks with a glass of sugar? Huh? At that moment, Tina became aware of Alex's voice on the radio. He was just wrapping up his traffic report. "Otherwise, you've got congestion-free routes in and around Redwell, but please, people, don't text and drive. Leave those phones alone." Tina listened briefly. She knew the voice, but she didn't seem to care, even when Alex added, "If you have something to say to your girlfriend, it's best to do it now." She grabbed the eggs resolutely and cracked them open. But Alex wasn't finished yet, as Funky Farnsworth noticed with astonishment. The young presenter remained at the microphone. After a deep breath, Alex began singing a message to his girlfriend over the airwaves. The song was not only heard in the kitchen of Martin's farm, where Bibi had quietly entered and quickly turned up the radio a bit louder. At Falkenstein Castle, Ethelbert also bobbed his head along with the music, while Count Falco could not help but criticize his son. "These public expressions of emotion, that is not in line with our social standing. Ethelbert!" He was visibly overwhelmed by the intense emotions his son had put into the song. Funky Farnsworth, on the other hand, was deeply moved and secretly wiped away a small tear. Alex almost burst into tears too when he thought about how happily he had once sat together with Tina on the pier in the evening sun, how they had danced under the old oak tree, how they had ridden the tandem, and how he had kissed the drip off her cheek while eating ice cream. Back at Martin's farm, Bibi eyed Tina with anticipation, who was still vigorously stirring her mix. Could Alex's song change her mind? But then Tina suddenly switched the radio to another station that was playing Spanish music. Ah, fantastica! Every memory of Alex, no matter how tiny, seemed to have been wiped away. The reconciliation. Bibi stood near the paddock fence and stared sadly at the horses wearing zebra blankets. None of her memory ideas had worked. She swatted at a fly that attempted to land on her neck. The blankets certainly did the trick. The flies avoided the horses and bombarded her instead. Alex had finished his shift on the radio and joined Bibi at the paddock fence. He was beyond disappointed that his song had no effect on Tina. Chico, who had avoided Tina the past few hours, was also at a loss. Alex gave Chico an apologetic look. "I'm sorry that I freaked out like that." "I don't want anything from Tina, honestly," Chico answered peacefully. Alex nodded. "Okay." Bibi was pleased. "I'm glad we at least have this part settled." Addressing Chico, she continued, "And I'm sorry about the spells earlier. I really didn't want to jinx you. I just thought if Tina thought you were stupid, then maybe she'd think Alex is great again." Rather awkwardly, she added, "And the falling in love thing is, of course, complete nonsense." Alex grinned. "Coming from the girl who rarely admits anything. You're gonna start this now?" Bibi replied irritatedly. The three remained silent for a moment. It was good that they got along again, but they still hadn't solved the issue with Tina. Again, a horsefly approached and landed on Chico. To shoo it away, Bibi accidentally gave Chico a fierce whack to the neck. Chico reacted with a laugh, but Bibi had an idea. What if Tina simply gets a knock on the head and everything is fine again? Alex and Chico stared at her. What? You're not serious, are you? Alex asked. Yeah, just only lightly, on the right. The right half of the brain regulates the emotions, replied Bibi. Alex thought he still couldn't hear properly. I read that, Bibi defended herself. Okay, you read that, Alex returned. What if you hit too hard, or you hit the wrong side? That won't happen, Bibi replied. Chico shook his head. I'm out. I won't do it. Me neither, Alex agreed with him. But I know who we could ask, and Bibi already had a pretty good idea who he was thinking of. The plan. Shortly afterwards, Bibi, Alex, and Chico stood in Freddy's forge and announced their plan. Freddy didn't seem to have a problem with it whatsoever and asked, How hard should I hit? 100% or more like 66%? He thought about it for a moment, then made a practice move with the horseshoe he had just finished. Alex corrected him quickly. Oh, nonsense, Freddy. More like 35, 25% maybe. Try like 10%? Bibi lowered the striking power again. Chico swallowed. Freddy seemed so determined, downright wildly determined. I'll get it right on target. I'm a professional. He struck the iron vehemently with his hammer. Bam, bam, bam. It's like forging. Alex looked at him in a panic. Freddy, gentle, but well aimed, okay? And then maybe this is better? Chico suggested. The three had brought a carpet beater, a toilet brush, and a cane wrapped in cloth. Freddy didn't mind. First, he tested the toilet brush, then the carpet beater for impact. Nope, these won't do. He decided to use the wrapped-up cane. And this will bring her back to normal? He asked skeptically. Hopefully, yes. Chico willed this as fervently as Alex. To be on the safe side, Bibi once again reminded Freddy. And very lightly, Freddy, and more to the right. Freddy nodded. Okay, no problem for Freddy. Do you know who I am? Freddy had positioned himself on a bale of hay in the barn. He was supposed to wait behind the door with a cane wrapped up until the others had lured Tina in. A short blow, and hopefully everything was back to normal. Here we go. Freddy did a practice swing at Alex's head. He flinched for a second, then nodded. Yeah, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? He turned to Chico and Freddy. You guys stay here. We'll get Tina. We have to make sure she doesn't go crazy just because she sees Chico. When Bibi and Alex stepped out of the stable, they froze in their tracks. In the yard, Tina was whirling around Mrs. Martin and her wheelbarrow in flamenco style, singing loudly and out of tune. Chico, who had stuck his head out of the barn, translated her confusing serenade. I'll ride the train of wishes until the fish coughs? Tina's next line of text amazed him. Chico translated, I love your socks. I love your serpentines. Tina could certainly use a Spanish lesson. Freddy smiled. Yep, where love goes, right? Mrs. Martin was baffled. What was wrong with her daughter? She noticed Bibi and Alex and asked them, was she in the sun too long or what? Bibi came to her with a bad conscience and confessed. Tina fell off her horse. Mrs. Martin looked at her horrified. What? And nobody informs me? She turned to Tina. We're going straight to the hospital. Bibi tried to calm her down. We were already at Dr. Roberts. Roberts said it would be all right. But judging by the way Tina behaved, one really couldn't be sure. But we already have a plan, said Bibi. And they did have a plan. Chico thought so too, and left the stable. He tried to draw Tina's attention with a psst psst and lure her to the door. Tina immediately interrupted her antics and beamed at him. Chico! She set off to run towards him, but hadn't counted on her mother to hold her back. Stop! We're going to the hospital. Tina tried to break free, but Suzanne Martin didn't let go. In the fracas, Tina accidentally stepped on a rake that had been lying on the ground. The handle flew upwards and snapped against her head with a force. Thwack! Tina fell backwards and lay on the ground motionless. What a scare! Mrs. Martin rushed to her daughter, but Bibi screamed out, "No, no, no!" Stunned, Tina's mother stopped. "Why?" she demanded. "She has to see Alex first," Bibi explained. Alex ran to Tina and bent over her. "Tina?" Tina's eyelids rolled up slowly, and she fixed on him with wonder. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, deeply worried. When Tina nodded, he continued, heart pounding. "Hey, do you know who I am?" Tina replied. "Alex?" Everyone watched intently as Alex nodded his head. "Yes, but who else?" Tina's face lit up. "What do you mean, who else? Just Alex." Then she smiled lovingly and gave him a big kiss. "My Alex!" Alex cheered. "She kissed me!" Tina laughed. "I've done it before, silly." Bibi, Chico, and Mrs. Martin were thrilled. Relieved, she took her daughter in her arms. "You're not always the easiest, but once someone gets to know you, they never want to let you go." She gave her daughter a serious look. "But tomorrow you'll go to the doctor with me, right?" At that moment, Freddie came out of the stable, still holding the cane in his hands. He hadn't noticed anything of what had occurred outside. Impatient to get things started, he yelled, "Are you kidding me?" And he lifted his arms up. Bibi shouted, "Freddie, no!" But it was too late. Freddie struck, and the cane came down on the right side of Tina's head. She cried in outrage. "Ouch!" Bibi moaned, "Not again!" But then Tina suddenly lurched up and whacked Freddie hard across the face. Smack! Freddie rubbed his cheek in confusion. "Whoa! Awesome!" Everyone laughed. Tina remarked dryly, "I always wanted to do that." Clearly, that was the Tina they all knew and loved. The call. The fact that Tina was herself again called for a celebration, and no one was better at that than Bibi and Tina together. They plopped down in the lounge corner with their two favorite bunnies and tried Tina's Spanish cooking experiment. Tina chewed on it listlessly. Well? Bibi didn't like it either. She shook her head in disgust. "No way." She put her plate down and said, "Thank God you're back." Tina smiled. "Everything okay again?" Bibi nodded. "Oh yes, everything's fine again." How could she be upset when Tina hadn't even been herself? She was just happy to have her best friend back. A ringtone interrupted them. "Is that yours?" Bibi asked. Tina shook her head. Then she found the phone under a pillow. "That's Chico's." "What? Give me that." Bibi grabbed it before Tina could stop her. "Bibi!" But Bibi had already answered. "Hello?" She listened curiously. At that moment, Chico came up to her and swiped the phone from her hand. "Ever hear of privacy?" Without another word, he walked away with the phone in his hand. Bibi looked at Tina. "I think it was his girlfriend." But Tina just shrugged. Bibi shouldn't stress about it. As long as he didn't want to tell them, it was really none of her business who had called him. Besides, she didn't want to let the young Spaniard spoil her mood. The two girls listened once again to Alex's song, "Come Back." Tina was quite embarrassed that she had simply switched the radio station. It was such a beautiful, soulful number. The two girls hummed along, absorbed by the sound. For all that had happened so far, this summer really was too beautiful not to enjoy the moment.